Ladies and gentlemen, I welcome you in the Kienzle Art Foundation for the talk with Gary Stephan about American painting from the 70s to now. Gary, we are very honored to have you here in difficult times. And I also want to thank Bertolt Mattes for creating this show. And I want to remember the passed by artists Louis Fishman and Jack Whitten. Now it's your turn, Gary. Thank you very much.
Okay. Yeah, feel free, if I'm going along and you hear something that I'm saying and you think, what was that? Just interrupt me and we'll address it. Because if you wait till the end, I mean, you can do that if you like, but if you don't want to wait till the end, we can digress to anything that crosses your mind. So the place I wanted to start, I was thinking about this show, and the thing I kept coming back to was a word that I'm very fond of called visuality. And I'd always thought that this was a word coined by Magritte, but I can't find the citation for that. So that may just be something I dreamt. But the difference between visuality and visibility goes like this. Visibility will take a page in a book. You can see the things, but looking at them and the way they're shaped is not their meaning. It's a conduit for the text. Whereas visuality, it's the appearance of something that is the meaning. It's the way it actually appears and what's contained within the appearance. So I've been thinking about this term visuality in terms of this show, because what's fascinating is what a good example this show is of it. As I was looking at it, I kept thinking, this is a perfect example of that. So here's the interesting thing. We were last week at another opening, your opening of Wuppertal, and you were talking about this show, and you said the same thing. You said, I think my show is about visuality. I thought, oh my God, how perfect. I couldn't have imagined you were going to say the same thing. So here's a quote. I want to digress to a quote, and I'm going to get this right. And it's a fantastic quote. It's always been one of my favorites. It's a quote from Nietzsche. And it's quite short. It's from The Gay Science. And it's about visuality, as I see it. And it reads like this. Oh, those Greeks, they understood how to live. What you need for that is to be brave and stop at the surface, the fold, the skin, to worship appearance, to believe in forms, tones, in the whole Olympus of appearance. And this is the great line, I think. Those Greeks were superficial out of profundity. So nicely Nietzsche, so paradoxical. You know, it's completely backwards thinking in a wonderful way. But the more I remember, I found that quote years and years ago. There was, at the Fashion Institute of Technology in New York, they had a Gianni Versace show. It was a survey of his work. And I was walking down the street and I was immediately arrested by it. And I thought, oh my God, Versace. Every day he had another idea. It's whether you like the style or not. It's really like ideas just jumped out of the head of Zeus with this guy on a daily basis. It's absolutely amazing. And they have this Nietzsche quote up on the wall. And that's where I picked it up from. So I kept it in my mind. So given that this is, as I see it, about visuality, I thought I'd talk about how some of these things conduct meaning. And I could start with these Jack Whittens. I hadn't planned on it, but I don't really have a plan for this. So we're going to move around a bit. One of the things I thought about this painting, it's this one and the Michael Venezia are the only two that really do it in this show. This is essentially a process painting, as is the Venezia. So certain things are put in motion, and then an activity is brought across it, and the image is the outcome. So it's not like he sat down and planned all of these things. He just set up a set of conditions, brought the tool across it. I'm guessing it was a tool that went across it, and then this results. But what's curious about it is spatially, it functions like a landscape painting, because the material on it is moving through the space, and it's as though the framing edge is the window, and this material is going through the window. Whereas this one is the image and the object in this way. What's underneath is clearly moving through the picture and not constrained by it. But the icon on the front is all about prescribing the rectangle. So one half of this painting, the under part, is passing through it as though it was a window. And the other half of it, the iconography on the front, the lines, treat it as though it's an absolute object with, absolute proportions, because this even hits the corners. This is a rare thing to do. Most pictures either do this or they do objecthood. Like the Venezia, we'll get to, is the perfect example of objecthood. It has basically no picture space in it at all. It treats the ground as though it was a table in a science experiment. And the little, I'm trying to think, I don't know the word in German, but at the end of a spray gun, there is something we would call a nozzle. There must be do you know what a nozzle is at the end of a spray gun? You can picture this. So that was all done by simply placing a series of nozzles against the edge of the painting. Painting is laying down and spraying across the surface, and that's how the image is created. So it's a complete process painting. Now, I want to talk about this Louise Fishman for a minute. The thing that makes this painting, and then I'll counterpoint it to the David Reed in there. This is a perfect painting about presence. All of the marks here are completely available. It's a series of actions that layer on top of actions, and they're all presents. Basically, nothing is hidden away. A few things are covered slightly, but fundamentally, this is a painting of presence. All the things are actual. Now, in counterpoint to this, what happened, and I'm just going to jump to the Baroque for a moment. What makes the Baroque so interesting, in counterpoint to the Renaissance, is in the Baroque, they're trying to hide the facts of it. By the time you get to the Baroque, instead of it being clear and revealing things, the symmetries, the wonderful symmetries of the Renaissance, everything is being broken apart, things are passing through each other. We saw the other day the Tiepolos, unbelievable. I mean, it's completely broken space. I mean, he's just luxuriating in the collapse of order. So they're trying to hide the clarity. So I want to go look at this David Reed for a minute. So if Louise's painting is completely available as a set of facts on the surface, the David Reed, which has essentially the same painting origins, painterly origins, it's all these gestures, but instead of it actualizing, instead of it becoming a way to understand what you're looking at and making it clear, David has a system of making these where he grinds the surface down. I've watched his people in the studio, they're all wearing masks, grinding away on the table. His studio is like a block from mine, so I keep peeking in at the people grinding the David Reeds down. So that what you net out, the final effect of a David Reed is you walk up to him, many people do, I do, you walk up to him and you go, how does he do this? How did he do this? What am I looking at? And that makes it the opposite of that Louise Fishman. And that kind of range strikes me as interesting. So I want to say that, I want to talk about my work now a little. This is from 1970, and it's before I came to terms with the constraints of the rectangle, which everyone else in this show, pretty much, with the exception of the Jackson, has come to terms with. So the only real rectangle in this is the rectangle in your mind, if you will, that's constructed out of the black line, this edge, and then in your mind, that edge. So there is a rectangle in the middle of this, and it's kind of a feature, in a funny way, of modernism. What modernism does, and I would start that maybe with Manet. What modernism does is instead of giving you all the information attached, it breaks the information up into bits and pieces and you assemble the image in your mind. And that's probably the big distinction between the Academy and modernism, is in the Academy, the formation is done for you. You could say it's almost the surrogate of the state, the artist. State's in charge, artist is in charge, you'll be fine, just pay attention, they're all done. Whereas modernism comes along and says, well, maybe it's not fine, and maybe it's not all out there. Maybe it's a co-construction between you and the object. And that brings the viewer into an active relationship with the object. And that's a significant change because it gives the viewer agency. So I made this in 1970. What I'd like to do then is show you that one from 3 years later. So I'm inching my way towards the rectangle here, 3 years later. It's a normal ground, it's a support, but I haven't fully accepted the rectangle yet. But I'm moving towards it. But the way this image works, and this was the way all of these worked for a few years, and it gets back to what I was saying out there about the formation of vision. What you're looking at here essentially are 4 clear geometries that have been allowed to intersect, so that there is a diamond here, of which this is the center, and that is the side. There's a circle here, and this is the center, and that's the side. There is a rectangle up in here, of which that is the center, and that's the side. And that's the other circle up in there, and it's side and center. So the image comes out of just making those things, marking those things, and then as they aggregate, they netted out an image. And the image I was hunting for, which is basically this one, was I was looking at a lot of Miro. And I thought, how am I going to get one of those Miro things? You know, a big complex form, often black. In fact, he makes a great painting. He made this really scary painting, if you can find it. It has a truly horrific giant black figure that runs through the whole painting. And the title of the painting is Painting for a Child's Bedroom. It's like, whoa. So that's how this works, and we'll get to my 2 others maybe at the end. But the thing I wanted to say about Harriet's and Jonathan's is there's a, and this goes back to Manet again, actually. Manet makes a distinction, and it's a real modernist distinction, and both of them will do it, and I'll show you what it is in a moment. Before Manet, if you're going to paint, say, for example, trees on the sky, a normal person would paint a tree, and then they paint sky up to the tree, and then they paint a little more sky, and they paint another tree, and they paint a little more sky. So you would do it pictorially. You wouldn't actually do it. The sky wouldn't actually go behind the trees. It would look like it went behind the trees. That's a depiction. What modernism does, and Manet is the first to do it that I can think of, is like he does these fabulous marine paintings, and the smoke coming out of the smokestacks is very often he'll paint all the rigging in. When it dried, he would then paint the smoke over it. So instead of it being a depiction, it was my term of art, it was an enactment. It was literally what happened, as opposed to looks like it happened. And these are perfect examples of enactments as opposed to depictions. You can see in this one, Harriet finished all these black forms under here so that we know that this goes over it, but it's not pictorial, it's an enactment. This is actually what happens. Those are the real layers, and they perform in real space. So this is something we take for granted now. You look at that and you say, well, you know, who doesn't do that? But this is a modern, pretty modern invention. Because up until Manet, nobody would do it. It makes no sense. I mean, who would paint a whole sky in, wait for it to dry, and then 3 days later put the trees in? It's not how you would do it. You would do it by bringing it up to the edge. Same with portraits. You don't paint, well, I guess in some cases you do paint the whole ground and then paint the child or whatever over it. Most of the time you paint the child's head and then you bring the setting up around the head because it's a depiction. It's not an enactment. And this one, the Lasker, and all of the Laskers you can check do the same thing. This is, that layer is under that layer and it's under this layer. So it's very clear, it's literally what happens. It's almost like building a sandwich. It's like first the bread went down, then the peanut butter, then the jelly. So it's not a depiction of it. And everyone in this show kind of observes that distinction. And it's also the case that even though there's so many different responses to the rectangle, they all share that constraint. And the reason that strikes me as interesting, if you think of the haiku or the sonnet in poetry, they're both constraints. They both make some things impossible to do. You can't do whatever you want. You have to make sure it fits into the structure. And it's that difficulty, that constraint, from that constraint comes the possibility of freedom. It's a different kind of freedom than you get if you just do whatever crosses your mind, but it also forces you to be more resourceful because you have to find a word that makes sense and that also obeys the structure. That is the constraint of the rectangle. So, see, I guess I could talk about this for a minute. This is my painting. And one of the things that was just kind of a surprise I hadn't anticipated, and you can at some point maybe look at that early painting from 1970, and this one, did I sign the sides of it? No, I signed a lot of them on the sides now. At any rate, this is probably 50 years later. This is part of a group of things I did for a really long time, like 6 or 7 years. I put aside the idea of inventing form, and I created these templates, which literally cut out of cardboard. And this is one template that's been painted to here, and then flipped, and then painted to there. So it creates this wobbly form. And what's interesting is this band in the middle, unintentionally, that curve is so evident in that painting from 50 years earlier out there. I couldn't believe it, because I didn't expect that, right? We were just saying earlier. It's like, wow, that's a little synchronicity. That's fun. But what these paintings were all about was, instead of inventing form, they were about asking myself, how does light and picture space make meaning? So it's essentially rethinking a category that someone like Caspar David Friedrich would have worked on. It's very much the same kind of question. So I looked at a lot of CDF's paintings and Italian Renaissance. And so for a number of years I did these. And then finally, after I did these, I returned to the core of my practice, which has always been the same. When I first got to New York, I had come from California, and I've been doing these incredible, oddball, surreal paintings, big landscapes, which to this day I really think are quite good. I like them. I see them to this day. I think, I really had something with those. But I realized too that I knew how they worked. I knew why they worked. I could see how the effects were being accomplished. So in a sense, I couldn't continue to make them because it would be a mannered practice then. I wouldn't be really learning anything. I would just be doing something that seems to surprise other people, but didn't surprise me anymore. So I thought, all right, I'm gonna have to move back to New York, which is where I was originally from. So I moved to New York in '64, I think. Run into these two guys I knew from California, and I said to them, I still have a mental picture of them sitting with their back to me on a couch, which may not be true. And I said to them both, hey guys, what's the most important question you can take on? And they said, expand the experience of picture space. I thought, oh, I like this. I thought, that is going to be very hard because it only happens like 10 times in history. You know, somebody gets to invent mechanical perspective, somebody else notices something else about foreshortening, but you don't get a lot of significant breakthroughs in the construction of picture space over time. What you get is genius variations on received themes, basically. But I thought, I think I could do this. So I worked on that, and basically I've returned to that. And so I don't know if I guess I could end with this painting here, which is mine and signed on the side, because I sign on the side now, which is kind of a great way to do it. Because you get to sign the paintings, but it doesn't distract from seeing them, and then you have the information. So if they have titles, the title goes in the middle there. So the thing that was interesting about this is this painting, in a funny way, operationally goes back to the painting from 1970. Because in the painting from 1970, you have to assemble bits and pieces to create the image. So the way this painting got made, this got made over the course of about a month, working on and off on it because it just didn't seem to go anywhere. So I reached a point finally where I wanted to bring tape with me and show you literally tape off the parts, but we couldn't. We looked for tape today in the stores. We couldn't find it. But I finally came to this image in here, just that. And these were still filled in. So it was this symmetrical object that sat in the middle, and I thought, oh, I don't know, that's not very interesting. So over the course of the next week or so, it developed these sides that locked in, and I thought, this is definitely getting better. This is much more interesting now. But the thing that did it, do you know the concept of because the title of this is phantom limb? Do you know the term phantom limb? You do? Okay, I'll just reiterate for those who may not know it. A phantom limb is what happens when someone loses a part of their body, but they still experience it as being there. I always thought that was a really interesting category. So I've often thought about phantom limbs. And I realized the phantom limb is sort of like the modernist argument because you think it's all together, but it's only all together in your mind. It's not all together in the outside world. I thought, oh, that's like the modernist contract. So that's what happened with this. When I went back and painted out this part and painted out that part, all of a sudden the image then gets finished in your mind. And I thought, oh, it's like a phantom limb. So that's how this got its title and how it gets its appearance. I think that might be it for the moment. Any, yeah?
I was thinking, especially as we came in here and you were talking about this painting, and because I was looking through the video, the green painting at the front, Louise Fishman.
Yeah, Louise Fishman.
Is right next to the window that goes out to the street. So there's the green through the window out to the street, as you're talking about the window in Louise Fishman. And then as you come in here, you're talking about the Harriet Corman, and this structure feels like the structure of the windows there. And then it starts to, and then you remember, but
yeah, I thought this had those kind of layers like this is the barnyard, this is the wire fence, and this is the wooden fence in front of that. But it's those kind of representational illusions.
But what I was just getting to was that Bertoldt and Jochen made such an incredible installation here, and how this goes right out there. I don't know where Bertoldt is, but there it is. But this referring to that, and then the Fishman going out to there, and the way in which all of these paintings dialogue with each other and make a kind of musical score that goes right through is another operating version of this visuality in the installation of the show.
This is my wife, Suzanne Jolson, also a painter. And
a big talker.
No, but it was very interesting.
Very important what you said. Yeah. Also the line for the show.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do the right thing.
So, in fact, I want to just talk about her work for a moment indirectly. No, I'm going to. Because I think what I'm doing, in fact, I'm sure I'm doing it. It's pretty clear in your show right now that I'm making changes to the ways in which geometric abstraction looks that are new. Some of those paintings are put together in a way that I've never seen a geometric painting put together like that. So I know I'm making innovation within a received language. But what's fascinating about Suzanne's paintings right now, she's innovating in a language she created. That's really hard. So every time I go up to her studio, I think like, well, these are cool. This is great. And then she comes down and says, I'm doing good work too, so it's fine. So you guys have any thoughts cross your mind, questions, anything?
I have a question, actually. I'm wondering, you know, at the time, in the late 60s, early 70s,
Yeah.
however you want to define it, do you think, were you think your peers who you thought were doing something similar, were you thinking about doing something that was really breaking with abstraction that had been, of course, was everywhere, especially in the US at that point? And how did you think about that?
Yeah,
at that time?
absolutely. I did. And I'll tell you, it's interesting. I was teaching a class last year. I was subbing at a different school than I usually go to. And I was looking at this student artist's work, and I thought, oh, this is so boring. I can't believe I'm looking at this. And I was trying to I was beating around the bush. I wasn't really saying how boring I thought it was. And finally I thought, I can't get around it anymore. I said, there's nothing new here. There's zero novelty in this work. And she said, which really knocked me sideways, she said, I only hear that about newness from people your age. And I thought, because, and I find it with my students now. In fact, we were just having a conversation because we're going to have dinner with a student because I brought this up with my students. And they said, you think it's possible to still make innovation? I said, yeah, it's really hard. But I think it can be done, and I think it's worth doing. Because until it happens, it looks like it's a fool's errand. You think like, who would bother with this? You know, you just waste your time. Just express yourself. Have a good time here. It's fine. And then somebody comes along and they actually do break through in some fashion. And then you think, oh, God, why didn't I try to do that? So we definitely believed it was easier to think of it then, obviously. And it is really difficult now. It's more difficult now because so much got invented at that time. You know, once people, I'm thinking particularly of the Black Stellas, Frank Stella paintings. I think this is the way it goes. Jasper Johns makes the flags, which means that the object and the image are one thing. Nobody's done that. And Stella sees that and thinks, that's important. And I can do that without even a reference, without even an objective reference. Doesn't need to be a flag or a target or a map. I can do that with pure abstraction. And that's what made those first black paintings so radical. It was like, oh my God, this is a painting? It has none, it's almost radical in the way that if you go back a decade to the Pollocks, Carl Jung sees a Pollock. I can't find the attribution for this either, but I think it's true. Carl Jung said these paintings are a catastrophe. This is the end of the archetypes, which it was. It was the new archetype of the void. And we had brought something into the world that hadn't existed. So yeah, we did think it was worth doing and doable, but it was easier then than it is now. Now, as my brother said, my younger brother, he said, your generation got the last of the good stuff. And he really feels sort of like, you know, I always said, well, life is like 6 grains of rice on a marble table. And basically, they've been taken off the table. There's like nothing left. In painting, it's kind of like that, but I think I've still made progress. I think it's doable, but extremely difficult.
I'm
Yeah,
sorry,
yeah. No,
just
please.
to follow up,
Yeah.
Did you see any sort of unifying thread with what some of your peers were doing, who were thinking similar things?
Well, it was the period where, because the painting had been seen as a thing, as opposed to a window, you get process painting shows up, like the Michael Venezia. And once people saw that it could be a process object, that it didn't need to have any pictorial references, a lot of things just spilled out from that. You know, like you think of, in sculpture, Richard Serra's early work, the prop pieces. In fact, let me digress to that for a minute, because it's a great story. So Richard Serra, I happen to know Richard at that time. We're all living in Tribeca, Lower Manhattan. This was when this part of New York, Tribeca, was dirt cheap. So when I tell people today, they say, so where do you live? I say, I live in Tribeca. They go, oh my God, that's so cool. But it was nothing. The artist bought the building because nobody lived there. It was like nothing. At any rate, Richard is working, and he meets these two Canadians, the Rabinovich brothers. And the Rabinovich brothers come to New York, and they're both super keyed up. And they say to me, and they say to everybody who'll listen, they show you a David Smith, a photograph of a David Smith. And they say to you, this is the way they do it, they go, what is this? You say, it's a David Smith. And they go, no, what is it? And I thought, I don't know what the answer is supposed to be. They said, it's surrealism. I said, it's surrealism. How is it surrealism? They said, because they're volumes. You can't see the inside. It's a secret. I thought, the Cubites, the late work. And they said, also they balance, but they don't really balance. It's the theatricality of balance. They're welded together. It's fake art. I thought, oh my God, because we were all praying at David Smith's altar at this point. I thought, these are such strange ways to look at this. Richard's listening to the same thing. And Richard takes and begins to make mass objects, things that have no inner space. So Richard believes that, and also says, I'm going to do what David Smith pretends he's doing. Mine are really going to balance. So you get all of the early Richard Serra is the Rabinovich brothers whispering these two oddball ideas into his head, and he never forgot them. 50 years he's been, and I don't think he gives them credit, by the way. I could be wrong.
And I think you must have an answer to the question because you're thinking about these questions. But isn't it also true that minimalism was providing such that your generation was really reacting against minimalism? That there was a love of minimalism and then the need, and I would say not just your generation, but everyone in this show, to do something that was less reductive, that was introducing the real world back into the Platonic
Good point.
reality.
Good point. You're absolutely right. Yeah. In fact, mine, because they did come out of landscape painting, for years and years, they held on to elements that felt absolutely like landscape tropes. And it probably took, honestly, till the 1980s when I finally thought, okay, we're gonna have to let this go. And then I tried not to think about them as reduced from or connected to landscape painting. But up until then, I pretty much always thought, I've got to have a way to talk about the landscape secretly in these because it's so meaningful to me as an expressive category.
I wanted to ask you, you were talking about little chance of innovation or progress. What means that for you in your work? What would you define? How would you define innovation in your work personally?
Yeah, it's really simple. I mean, and it depends on what other people think is true about it. But if I can do something that I think is truly novel, and I looked up novel in the dictionary because it sounds pejorative in English. It sounds almost trivial. Oh, it's just a novelty. But the word novel really means something without precedent. And I'm confident, I don't know how big a deal it is. I mean, that's not for me to say. I think it's a big deal working in my studio. that the changes I'm making to the constraint of geometric abstraction, I know I've never seen. And my generation came up on this idea, which I'll say to you, is if you could look at someone else's work and find anything in it that reminded you of any other artist, you were done for it. You couldn't do it anymore. It was like, oh, geez, you know, you're right. And so, like, I'd be doing something, and one of my roommates would come in, they'd just look at a corner of it, and they'd go, that's it, David Hockney, no? And you'd go like, oh, God, you're right. Okay, it's David Hockney. So then you'd have to go back and work on it, see if you can pull the Hockney out of it so that the thing spoke on its own terms. So in my studio now, I think mostly the drawing ideas, the way things are structured, I think they're new. And if I'm right, then I think that's a big deal. If I'm wrong, then, you know, most people are wrong.
If I transcribe it in my words, that would mean innovation is to cancel all the references to other people.
Nice way to put it, right? Or contribute something new to an ongoing tradition, to bring something to it that just hadn't been there before. So that's a more positive spin on the same sentence, I think. Yeah.
Do you agree?
I think that's problematic. Quite problematic.
Sure. What's the problematics on it?
Well, you were citing Jung. I would cite Freud, and that's maybe one line to talk about problematic in it.
Okay, we'll talk about Freud later. Yeah, about killing the father, man.
Well, that's put it very simple, but we don't have to go to the psychoanalytic side, but you were citing quoting him, so that's why I referred to it. But I think it's also problematic in a pictorial tradition but everybody has to think about it, him or herself, what might be the problem, but...
Yeah, and as I did say earlier, the number of artists that actually innovate in a fundamental way is vanishingly small category. I think in those terms, but it's frankly, it's a stupid way to look at art. Because you would have to say things then like, well, Michelangelo really isn't innovating, he's just doing stylistic turns on existing ideas. But that's a stupid way to look at Michelangelo. So yeah, you don't want to use this idea of paradigm shifts, of which there are a few, like Giotto is a paradigm shift. You really get the beginning of humanism, you really get these inner lives. Before that, you really don't have that. So it's a big deal. You get that, again, you get it obviously with Cézanne. You get a whole new way to think about what this object is. But you can make a real short list of people who've done that kind of thing. It's probably 8 artists in history. And the rest, you still want to think about Morandi. I do anyway. I think they're kind of fabulous. But they don't really break any ground. You don't look at a Morandi and think, what's at stake here? It's pretty obvious that it's the compressed space of Cézanne, and it's a touching palette, and it's beautiful little elements in a still life, and that's it. But it's...
Well, that you see again and again and again.
And you see it again and again.
It's the same 12,
That's
same 12
right.
buddies for 50
Yeah.
years. That I think is a big part of it.
I think you're absolutely right. And you realize he also had a custom table that he put everything on? He had a tipped up table to put the objects on so that he built in that distortion. But my point is only, yeah, innovation is not a particularly useful criteria. It just happens to interest me. But there are many other ways to look at it. Better, maybe. Probably better. We're good? Okay, thanks for coming.